We got this. All right, this is the Awesemo Live Before Lock NFL style. I'm joined by Kyle Dvorchak here, and we are sponsored by No House Advantage. We will talk about them. In the meantime, we're going to talk about the Inactives. Couple surprises there. CJ Beathard is inactive, Kyle, as is Jeff Wilson Jr.
I did see the Jeff Wilson one because he popped up. It was surprising. He was healthy entering the week and popped up with, I forget what injury it was, but he popped up with that late in the week. So that's really interesting. And because we had a quiet game from Jerick McKinnon last week, there's some interesting potential here. And of course, Raheem Mostert, you have to say it probably is a small boost. So it looks like I'd imagine Jerick McKinnon is the entire backup. This is just, it's quite surprising because up until, I don't know, I think it was probably like a Thursday or Friday practice, Jeff Wilson showed no signs of not playing. So, a little bit of a late surprise. It's small, and it's really only relevant to like Showdown. If we were talking about Yahoo plays their full slate as all of Sunday. If we were talking about that, you and I wouldn't, care at all about Jeff Wilson. But baby, when we talk about Showdown, if that funnels two carries and a target to the right guy, could be big.
Yeah, it sort of makes all of the difference, and we'll talk about that. We've got a variety of things that we want to talk about as well. Favor when you guys come on in, hit that like button. We do appreciate it. Also subscribe. We're asking for a little push. Just go ahead and join the subscribe. You should be able to see that when you go onto our homepage near any of at the top, and then on it will be there, as well as it will be, let me look and see here. It's always hard to get to your channel when you're logged in as the super master person here, but you can see the subscribe button. Let's see, up near in the upper right corner, it looks like. So check that out. We do appreciate that, and that would be very, very helpful for us. Small thing to ask. All right, let's jump on in here and get talking. I think we got everything up. Let me go through this. Okay, so we'll talk about No House Advantage in a bit, but I want to get through these inactives. So there was nobody other than these two, the 49ers side, which we'll get to when we talk about the 49ers. Nothing really surprising from the Rams. Raymond Calais, Tristan Jackson, and Bryson Hopkins were running back, wide receiver, and tight end, I believe. Haven't really played at all. So no big deal there. And then we'll talk about no surprise. I mean, I guess there are surprises, but there's not that much actionable items from the San Francisco side, other than it gives them less chance to pull shenanigans or pull Jimmy G. I'm assuming, is Nick Mullins out, or who's the backup quarterback tonight?
No, Nick Mullins. You said they said CJ Beathard inactive tonight. Then it would be Nick Mullins.
It would be okay. I couldn't remember if he wasn't playing because he was hurt or because he was.
No, he got benched the last time we saw him start. It was 2 weeks ago. He started, and they were playing. I want to say it was the close game against Philly, and like against the Philly defense that we've seen not play well in other spots. Like they gave up a ton of points to Lamar today. Who else? Pittsburgh ran over them. Nick Mullins just wasn't getting the job done. So CJ Beathard comes in and almost made a comeback winning drive. I guess a few drives actually. But now we won't have him. So yeah, Nick Mullins should just be healthy and apparently bad.
I'm double checking. Yeah. So and I know it's CJ Beathard, but it was a college football thing that we called him Beat Hard because it was funny to say, and we weren't expecting to see him in the pros. So there we go. That's for chat. I know you know that I know the name. So yes, Nick Mullins is active. So he will be serving as the backup. Okay, now that takes care of that. Let's talk through some of the Rams stuff here. So here's where it gets a little bit crazy. So Jared Goff has been okay. We'll call it okay this year. He's been solid with his last 4 outings. He has multiple touchdowns or 280 yards in 3 of his last 4 games. The 49ers defense a little bit banged up. Well, more than a little bit. Ton of people are out. We know that.
Yeah.
Here's what caught me off guard. The Los Angeles Rams are passing 48.5 48% of the time. That means they are rushing more than they are passing. I did not expect to see this coming from a Sean McVay team. We do have, because if you're just looking at it and you lose that context, you will see, Jared Goff, he's attempting 30.4 passes per game. That must be pretty good. It's 24th so far this year. The game has changed, so we just need to know where to level set. I turn this over to you. What's going to happen? They're going to start passing more, aren't they?
I mean, I think they only start passing more if they end up being behind, because we've seen when they're going to run rush shot over Washington, over the Giants, and this plays a major role in it. They have played Washington, they've played the Giants, they've played the Eagles, they've played the Cowboys. None of those teams, even the Cowboys in the game that they played against the Rams, looked remotely competent. The only game they played against a competent team was versus the Bills. And I believe they even held a lead in that game. I think that was a Josh Allen comeback game. So most of their games are even at best, most of their games are close. At worst, they're blowouts. So, and I do believe this line opened at 3.5. I'm not sure if it's still there, but given the recent struggles of the 49ers, I know Vegas likes, and the money seems to like, just generally as the favorites, the Rams. So if they go out and at least stay close, I don't even think they need to, it's not like a mega positive game script. I think if they just hold a neutral to slightly positive game script, they're just going to keep running the football, because one, they have done it well, dating back to outside of last year, the days of Todd Gurley. He was an incredibly efficient runner. And we saw as long as they have guys who are healthy and knees aren't dusted, this is more of almost like any other NFL team, a system that creates good running games. So if you're going to have good blocking, if you're going to have neutral to positive game scripts, Sean McVay seems to be playing a game of hide the Jared Goff, and he's done it well so far. So I think we'll see a little bit of Jared Goff, but more so than almost any other team. And you said it, they're passing less than they are running. I think 4 teams before this week could lay claim to that, and most of them are winning teams too, outside the Minnesota Vikings. So I think as long as they're playing in a neutral game script, their philosophy just seems to be, let's run the ball efficiently, play decent defense, and get out of here with a win. And they're favored. So I think we see a lot of running primarily from Darrell Henderson, but boy, this has been just a nightmare of a backfield to actually try and undertake.
Yeah, this is. So let's branch our way into that. So I said in my notes, here's where things get interesting. After missing weeks 2 and 3, Cam Akers saw only 19% of the snaps in week 5. Malcolm Brown and Darrell Henderson were the co-leaders, each being around on the field around 40% of the time. Henderson is seeing about 2/3 of the work. Akers and Brown splitting everything else. I said this is a fluid situation. It could be a hot hand situation. DraftKings, or pardon me, FanDuel, I'm not really interested in any of them. You could maybe get me to Darrell Henderson if we assume he is the lead back. DraftKings made it very, very interesting. 7,600 for Henderson, 2,000 for Akers, 1,600 for Brown. The 49ers still have the 6th best rushing DVOA, even though they have all sorts of injuries on the defensive side of the ball. What is your FanDuel approach, and what is your DraftKings approach? Because it's wildly divergent salaries between the two sides for the Rams running backs.
Yeah, I think DraftKings pricing of Malcolm Brown specifically is just, it's not great. I think he should be, maybe he won't be, but he should be one of the higher owned players. We saw just 2 weeks ago that he was the leading back, and I believe he's been the leading back in terms of touches and carries twice in 5 games this year. Darrell Henderson taking the other 3. I think it was weeks 1 and 4 were the Malcolm Brown weeks. The other ones have been Darrell Henderson weeks. We haven't seen a lot of Cam Akers because of that rib injury. So it's been a shifting landscape. And it was Darrell Henderson, like a hamstring injury, I believe, to open the year. So we have not really, and may not even see tonight, the ideal situation that Sean McVay would want to run, depending on Cam Akers' health. I still think you have to take some shots on the idea that 2 weeks ago, just 2 weeks ago, when, as far as we could tell, Darrell Henderson was healthy, Malcolm Brown just ran over him. Like, if there is a chance that you can get a lead back for, I believe he's 1,600, I'm going to be firing off a lot of money on Malcolm Brown. And I don't think Darrell Henderson is a bad play either. I just think the range of outcomes includes games where Malcolm Brown ends up being the clear lead back on this team. And he's priced like a guy, he's priced not that much ahead of like Kyle Juszczyk or like, Jerick McKinnon, who really doesn't figure to be much more than just a handful of plays as a pass catcher. There is definitely a scenario in which Malcolm Brown gets in on the second drive and gets hot, or Darrell Henderson fumbles or misses a pass block, whatever coaches love benching guys for, and Malcolm Brown is just the guy for a game. So I think Malcolm Brown on DraftKings is one of the better plays. Like you said, the pricing different on FanDuel. You could definitely talk me into some Darrell Henderson. And I'm generally just on FanDuel trying to target quarterbacks and running backs with my MVP spot. So although Darrell Henderson brings with a lot of risk that he just doesn't end up being the guy, and part of the allure is him as a pass catcher, not as valuable on FanDuel, I still think he is one of the better plays. And it's mostly because the quarterbacks are awfully unappealing. So although Darrell Henderson brings a decent amount of risk, neither of the quarterbacks like really mitigate a ton of risk either because of how run heavy the Rams have been and frankly how bad Jimmy Garoppolo has been. So it's a weird night on FanDuel where the quarterbacks and the running backs outside of Raheem Mostert, who I think is the best play on FanDuel, none of them really set up to be great plays. So maybe this is a spot where you can actually consider getting into a wide receiver or a tight end potentially, even though I think typically on FanDuel that is not a winning strategy. You want to target quarterbacks and you want to target running backs because there are no bonuses and touchdowns are so heavily prioritized by it not being PPR. So on DraftKings, Malcolm Brown is just a bad price for a guy who has a ton of upside. On FanDuel, Darrell Henderson's all right. I think I'd probably very much heavily lean Raheem Mostert over him, though.
All right, let's hit the Rams wide receivers here. We've got Brandon Cooks, of course, over on the Texans. Everything is funneled to Woods and Kupp. However, as I sort of mentioned, with them only attempting 30 passes per game, that works out to Woods seeing 6.1 targets and Kupp seeing 7.1 targets. Not exactly what we were expecting. Over the last 3 games, Josh Reynolds, who offers some salary relief here, has been seeing 4.3 targets. Van Jefferson, completely an afterthought, has just 2 total targets in those games. Do you lean
I think
Woods or Kupp if you're choosing between them? I lean Woods.
I wouldn't.
To complete that thought, I wouldn't fight anybody over it. I just lean Woods.
Yeah, I would go Kupp when I'm not adjusting for salary because we've just seen more volume from Kupp. And last year he was the guy who they primarily went to of their receivers in the red zone. But given the adjustment for salary, I actually think I'm with you on Woods, but it's a very slight lean. And I like that Josh Reynolds call. He is so the ADOTs on these guys is incredible. It's like Juju Smith-Schuster or old school Jarvis Landry levels where they're like, I believe both Woods and Kupp are below 6 ADOTs, like 5.6 and 5.9, if I have that right, with Woods being the lower one, but we're splitting hairs there. And then at nearly double that, we have Josh Reynolds running as clearly the number 3 receiver, not really much involvement from Van Jefferson. And he's the guy they're using to stretch the field. And I guess that, makes sense. Woods and Kupp both kind of profile as low ADOT slot yak kind of guys. Josh Reynolds, not as much. But Josh Reynolds at that price, and he's seeing a little bit of volume, but has a lot of air yards backing that volume. In fact, I believe he leads the team in air yards. If not, I know he's beating, I'm sure he's beating Robert Woods in air yards. I think that's it for sure. So I like where you're going with that. I think he provides you some salary relief. He still gives you some upside, and he has a role. It's not a great role, but there aren't a ton of great roles on this slate. This is a slate where there have been a lot of moving parts because of injuries. If you can find a cheap guy who can give you 2-3 deep shots in a game like Josh Reynolds, I think he's probably one of the better, not quite punt play territory, but one of the cheaper salary relief guys on the Rams side of things in addition to Malcolm Brown.
All right. I mentioned that we are sponsored by No House Advantage. Let's talk about them for just a moment. It is a prop fantasy site. So what it is they call it peer-to-peer. So gamers play gamers. They're very, very clear about this. That's why they call themselves No House Advantage. The prop wagers are not against them. It's for confidence points. And then you put your entries into tournaments like we're used to seeing. So normal GPPs, 50-50s, head-to-heads, etc. And then we're playing against other gamers. You get about between 50 and 70 questions that they ask, and then you choose an over or an under. And then you rank them 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you put in 5 questions, but 5 is your most confident and 1 is your least confident. And then if you are correct, that's where you get the points. Sounds a little complicated? Not really, because we do all the heavy lifting for you here at Awesemo. On our projections page for No House Advantage, we actually put up their props each day for their events, and then we say the likelihood of the prop going over or under, and then the percentage of value that's left within that line. If that's a little complicated, it just says over and under in the far right column. We're making this easy for you. Now, I don't think anybody else has that particular methodology out in an easily consumable form. So that is your advantage. Today, I believe their main GPP went off at 35% overlay. So I just want to point that out. Good time to go try a new site. Again, that is No House Advantage. If you use the promo code Awesemo, they will match your first deposit up to $20 in site currency. Okay. Now let's get through the 49ers here, and then we can start talking some site strategy, some roster construction, and we'll have some fun. So let me get back to my notes here. So we did mention that CJ Beathard is. Oops, sorry. One last thing. The tight ends. We didn't talk about the tight ends. I think we spent enough time on them, even though we didn't talk about them.
I know.
Okay.
That's so funny. I literally made that point in my article. I said the reason you haven't read about Tyler Higbee is because you shouldn't be playing him. I said the exact same thing.
Yeah, I can't believe I just flew right by them. But here's our point here. So you've got Higbee has double the targets of Everett, 17-9. Unfortunately, that's not what we were expecting from Higbee. He did have a 3-touchdown game. That was all the way back in week 2. On the season, he has 15 catches for 166 yards and those 3 touchdowns. Everett, on the other hand, has 8 catches, but for 141 yards. And if you remember, Everett was the starter until he got hurt. He was actually the preferred option. And then it was Higbee that just went on a monster tear. Higbee has always been the better blocker and generally playing more than Everett. But all of a sudden, down the stretch and then into the playoffs, what did Higbee have? Like 4 out of 5 games with at least 100 yards or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
So it was fantastic. But here's what I'm doing. I'm only playing one of them. I've already set those rules, and I've actually capped them both at 30%. And I've also made Everett an equal points per dollar ratio. So I should get them equally because he is such a significant decrease. Now, I think we projected him for like 4 on DK or 4.17 or something like that. I believe I moved him up to 6 or 7. I kept Higbee where he was at, which then I think Higbee was at like 9 or 10. But I made it so it was going to be a little closer together. And the reason I did that is I want to get equal shares, and I don't mind if Higbee falls out. Because when we start talking about the overall pricing, you're going to realize both quarterbacks, Mostert, Kittle, who we haven't gotten to, Woods, and Kupp, they're all kind of priced about the same. You can't get all of them. I don't know that I want to waste anything on the mid-tier here, which the mid-tier would be Higbee. And it's like, for what? Cue the 3-touchdown game. But, that's where I am. And then defense, the only one I've capped both my defenses at 7%. I really don't want to play either one. In the last 2 games against the 49ers have allowed 5 sacks, 2 interceptions, and a fumble in each of their last games. The only one I really want to play is the Rams, but I'm really not that excited because they're priced for it. They do lead the league in sacks, but they only have 4 picks and 2 fumble recoveries. So any additional thoughts? I don't know there's much to glean from that.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with the Higbee Everett split. And since that blow-up game, which I think people who drafted Higbee and season long, we were playing him in DFS, who saw that stretch last year, they thought they were getting what they paid for, that 3-touchdown game. And it's just it's not been that has not been the case. It's not even close. In the past 3 weeks, I believe Everett has 1 fewer target, but as many catches and more receiving yards because he's been producing yak pretty well. I actually think the problem is Everett isn't priced like a backup tight end. He's more priced like a bad starting tight end. So, do you want to go with him? But then Higbee is priced as like almost a premium or a high-end starting tight end. That's not great. So I don't want a ton of either of these guys. I think what you said, capping your ownership to both, is probably not a bad strategy. If we have, let me check our ownership. Maybe if we have a bit more interest in Higbee over Everett, I would say maybe that's just a small leverage play. But I don't know, our ownership on Higbee is 20%. Like on a showdown slate, that's not even that much. So I don't think you gain a ton of leverage by playing him. My only thought is that Everett is only being used in the flex at 2%. I think at that ownership, that's the only reason I want to play him. We have him as a terrible points per dollar play, and we don't have Higbee as a great one either. But if I'm going to get a guy who's like a 1B tight end, you could call him if you want to say that, at 2% ownership, I actually think he's a decent play, specifically because, the randomness of a single showdown slate is such that if he catches a touchdown, his 2% ownership, you're just smashing. So I like him specifically because of the ownership, but in terms of just what they offer me from a fantasy perspective, neither of these guys are like sniffing my cash lineups or anything.
All right, chat favor. We're asking you guys to subscribe now. It helps us out against that just evil YouTube algorithm. I just want to double check, though. You'll see a red subscribe button down in the lower right corner. I thought it was in the upper right. It's in the lower right corner of the screen. If you just click subscribe, that helps us out Doesn't cost you anything. If you want to hit that notification bell, though, you can also have it send you notifications when we go live with our different shows, and we are certainly pumping out a lot of them. You can also get anything except for our Live Before Locks on the Awesemo Podcast Network that is available on all podcasting platforms. If you can think of a podcasting platform, we are on it. We have the Awesemo main channel, and then we've also broken it out by sports. For those of you that have are running out of storage on your phone, you can just choose by sport, say save last 2 episodes or whatever, and then not be overrun, because we're putting out between 5 and 6 shows per day. So definitely check that out and have some fun. We have, 24 minutes to go. Let's talk about the 49ers. So Garoppolo was benched at halftime of the last game. The Rams have the 3rd best passing DVOA. The 49ers obviously prefer to run. However, this year they are throwing on 60.25% of their plays. That is 14th in the league. So that's perspective there. Seattle is right by them. So when we say, wow, those are 2 teams we think of as running a lot, and they're throwing 60% of the time, and then we say the Rams have been running 52% of the time, throwing 48% of the time, you can see the dichotomy there. But for me, having Deebo Samuel's back, he played a little over 80% of the snaps last week, seems to be healthy enough that he's going to be functional. You got George Kittle. He's a boost to any tight end. And we've seen Jimmy G look pretty above average for most of his 49ers tenure. I'm going to give him mulligan. If they have made CJ Beathard, I keep saying Beathard. If they have made him inactive, obviously they still have Nick Mullins. I was worried that Jimmy G was maybe harboring an injury or not fully healthy. I would think if they're only going to go with the 2 quarterbacks that he's probably healthy. He could still be pulled, but that's one less issue we have lurking, is potential hidden injury. How confident do you feel with Jimmy G playing the full game?
Yeah, so you definitely have the right read on what I would imagine was a potential injury situation, because when he was benched, I believe it was only 1 game after, or actually it was the game that he came back from. Correct. Was it high ankle sprain or something, some sort of high ankle injury. So I thought maybe that if not that was the case, that they would at least play it off as, oh, well, he got banged up, he re-injured that. But clearly that's not the route they're going with. They're saying they just benched him because he was bad. So do I think he is healthy? Absolutely. I think your read on not having 3 quarterbacks into the game almost solidifies the fact that they believe he is healthy. Now, is he good? I don't know. I've been met on his performance basically the entire time he's been in San Francisco. He had an initial run that was pretty nice. Since then, he's been perfectly adequate. In that, Kirk Cousins, Matt Ryan, whatever quarterbacks you want to throw out.
Does not safely distance himself from Nick Mullins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's every once in a while when he goes cold, you're like, should they play Nick Mullins? I don't know, maybe. So do I think he plays the entirety of the game? I still think that is for essentially any starting quarterback, you would bet on him playing the entirety of the game. I do think maybe you bake in a small amount of risk, but I think you would do that you're not doing that by playing Nick Mullins. You're doing that just by fading him. And specifically, if you think that he actually has a decent chance of getting benched. You talked about this, this Rams defense has actually been pretty good, especially at generating sacks. We know that quarterback play when pressured is quite unstable. So if he's making a few mistakes because they're getting pressure on him, we could see those turnover numbers that you talked about being kind of lacking come up, because that would be, I think, the most random part of all the defensive, statistics you mentioned, is that if they're generating a lot of sacks, it's a little surprising they aren't generating a lot of turnovers. So right. I think potentially running with some Rams defense, you said you were kind of low on the defenses. I think Rams defense actually makes some sense here against the quarterback who we just saw get benched, coming back from that injury, and they don't seem to say it's the injury. They just seem to say he's bad. So I don't hate going with the defense. I think it also correlates well with whatever running back you want to play from the Rams. I still think Darrell Henderson is the best bet, but I think a really interesting approach is just going multiple running backs on the Rams and a defense, especially in the highest of tournaments, because I think people are going to be afraid of playing. Just stacking up the Rams and the double running back. Nobody likes playing double running backs. It doesn't seem to intuitively make some sense. It's Showdown. Things are random. Try and get unique. So I think them with the Rams defense would be quite interesting. I'm not going 0 on Jimmy Garoppolo. I just think there are probably a decent amount of reasons to be concerned, But when you look at his offense, they probably don't want to use him anyway. I know you talked about how much they are passing, especially relative to last year. I think most of that comes from them not winning a ton of football games. If they keep this game close, I do think we see an attempt to be more run heavy. Now, if they can't keep it close, they have no choice. And we've seen that since they haven't kept a ton of their games close, they actually have had to pass more. So I think I still want to attack this game either through or attack this side of the football, either through George Kittle, who seems maybe not entirely insulated from, a bad offensive output, but his volume is so great that he could be the only spot you want to target on this team, or Raheem Mostert, who has just been electric on every single touch, now appears fully healthy. I think Raheem Mostert is probably the way you would prefer to attack this. I get a little nervous when looking at Jimmy Garoppolo playing, getting benched, not playing particularly well, even when he's not benched. So it doesn't have me entirely off of the passing attack, but it does give me a lean to Raheem Mostert and the other backs.
All right. I don't really have much to add on that. So let's continue on to the wide receivers here, just in the interest of time. And then we can always circle back because we'll get some more questions specifically on these. So Deebo Samuel's back, played 89% of the snaps last week. He tied George Kittle with 8 targets. Let's see, he has 11 targets on the season. He has 5 catches for 54 yards. But having him on the field as much as he is, and he also got a carry, I like that. You've got rookie Brandon Ayuk and veteran Kendrick Bourne. They had 6 and 4 targets respectively in the last game. They're perfectly fine. They're kind of in that Reynolds area for some salary relief. They're not horrible. I think these guys might get average 1.5 more targets, but that doesn't mean a whole hill of beans there. So they're all kind of in that mix. When we get down to tight ends, because we got to loop Kittle in with this, Kittle leads the team with 28 targets despite missing 2 games. That's all you really need to know. He is my captain tonight in my lineups. I'd probably have to get into lineup 10 or 15 before I made Deebo Samuel's my captain, but I don't dislike that. But I'm very, very strong on Kittle, and I agree with you on Mostert. How do you feel about the rest of the pass catchers here for the Niners?
Yeah, so we saw in his first game back, Deebo Samuel was fairly limited, played on a limited snap basis, didn't get a ton of work, and it was a game that...
one target!
Yeah, it was like he didn't play a ton of snaps, he didn't get a ton of work. But then last week, I believe it was 8 targets to 6 targets. He nearly outsnapped. It was like 4 fewer snaps than Brandon Ayuk. I think that should be expected. That the more he comes back from this foot injury, that foot injury, was that the Liz Frank surgery, I believe, has a miserable re-injury rate. Guys come back from that and get hurt right away so often. So I think it makes sense that when you have an injury that has such a high risk of you coming back and immediately getting taken from your team again, that they are going to take their time easing him in. We saw in game 1 target, just a handful of snaps. Game 2, still outsnapped by Brandon Ayuk, but the volume was there for him. He even got that carry, as you said. I think by now we should expect him to be the number 1 receiver, not overall receiving option, but the actual number 1 receiver on this team. Does bring a little bit of pass catching equity. I think I would take him pretty cleanly over Brandon Ayuk. And I think maybe Kendrick Bourne would be the pivot off of either of these guys, maybe specifically Ayuk, if Ayuk's going to be even like modestly owned. I think the Kendrick Bourne versus Brandon Ayuk dichotomy shouldn't be that much different, but I'm guessing people will recognize the Brandon Ayuk name and be much more excited to play him. He had an awesome highlight reel. I think it was a run, but it was the one where he hurdles the guy. So people are actually going to recognize that name and click him, whereas Kendrick Bourne is, fringe 53-man roster kind of guy. He's basically just around because he's a veteran presence. If he's going to get some targets, I think he makes a decent pivot over Ayuk. You could also use him as a pivot over Samuel, but I actually like Samuel. So he would be my primary pass catcher that isn't George Kittle. George Kittle, I agree, is pretty cleanly the captain on this slate.
All right. Let me... this, because I just realized I did not upload. Even though I've built out all my files, I did not upload them. There's nothing worse than not uploading your file. Although I've had such a disaster of a day, it really wouldn't matter. All right, got that one up. Okay, so that takes us through to the defense here. A whole lot of yeah. The Rams have done a good job protecting Goff via play calling as well as their pass protection. They have allowed just 7 sacks through 5 games and have 6 total turnovers. Not really excited for that. So let's kind of rank our players here. So for me, I mentioned Kittle's number 1. Mostert is 2. must start, I believe. I said that he will get about 60% of the workload. With Wilson out, I'm going to say he's going to get 70% of the workload. That makes McKinnon more of the passing down guy. McKinnon will probably pick up a couple extra carries. Won't be Kyle Juszczyk because he just goes out there and blocks and then scores a touchdown in the Super Bowl or something like that. He did get a touchdown last week on one of his 2 carries. It's a fullback. It doesn't score. Jimmy G and Goff are the next 2 guys. You could argue on FanDuel for the reasons you stated that they should be at the top because of the half-point PPR, lessening the receiving options, and then no bonuses, kind of tamping down expectations, makes quarterbacks a little bit better there. Then I go down to Robert Woods. Then I've got the kickers. Yeah, I'm not excited, but I need some cheap guys. Then I've got Kendrick Bourne because I like him. And then I've got Cooper Kupp, but I said, I wouldn't fight anybody if they had Woods up there. Deebo Samuel is there for me, and then Josh Reynolds. So that's my top 10. So that's kind of my cash group that I'm taking players from. Do you see anybody I've left out? Do you want to re-rank any of those? Do you want to emphasize anything with regards to roster construction as we wind up our last 19 minutes here?
Yeah, I think this is a game probably more so than most any other game, not every other game, but more so than many other games, that sets up as if one team has a lead, they are going to want to run the ball. I know we've seen, like I talked about, the 49ers passing a lot. That's probably a product of them not winning as many games as they did last year, at least obviously not on pace to win as many games. And the Rams have been winning their games and have just been one of the 4 to 5 most run-heavy teams in the NFL. So I think it's important. Maybe you can find ways to get different. And I don't think, if you look at a guy like JaMychal Hasty, who maybe gets a handful of carries, maybe he plays the Jeff Wilson role, he doesn't really have to correlate too much. You just need like a long catch or a long run from him. But when you look at the expensive guys, Raheem Mostert and Darrell Henderson probably have a very strong amount of negative correlation because only one of these teams can have a very large lead or a sustainable lead. If the other one is losing, they're unlikely to run with their prospective running back. With the Rams, there's a mix of guys. With the 49ers, it is quite clearly Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert has 2 start and finishes on the year. I think 3 starts, but only 2 starts that he finished. 63% of the carries. And in last week, he had a team-high 5 running back targets, out-targeting Jerick McKinnon, which is interesting because you would think maybe Jerick McKinnon would play that role, especially with Raheem Mostert just coming back from his injury. Not the case. I think Raheem Mostert is just the guy. I think he is probably the number 1 play, I would say, on both sides. I actually like him as the number 1 play. Oh, I guess George Kittle will be the number 1 play on DraftKings. George Kittle, number 1 on DraftKings, then Raheem Mostert. And then for me, I think I'm going to go with a bit of an upside play in Cooper Kupp. Then I move to both quarterbacks, then Darrell Henderson, Robert Woods, Deebo Samuel probably and Robert Woods are tied. It's flip a coin. Who cares? I don't know. Go with the lower owned guy, captain. Do that. Malcolm Brown, maybe Kendrick Bourne. After that group of probably 7 or 8 guys, it really falls off to just like tournament dart throws. After you get past Woods and Deebo Samuel, you're just playing the ownership game. And even then, we don't see a ton of really cheap guys end up making the optimal captain spot because that means all of the guys up top had to do well enough that you wanted to jam them in, but not too well that one of them ended up being the optimal. You need a bunch of 15 to 20 point games for a guy under 3K to be the optimal captain. So I think for me, there's the quite obvious plays. It's basically all of the guys who are the top receiving options or the top running back options, the quarterbacks. Raheem Mostert and George Kittle are pretty much in a league of their own in terms of who I want to captain on DraftKings. Raheem Mostert takes that solo spot where I think he's simply the best MVP play on FanDuel.
All right. On to our next tier of players and sort of the lineup construction. This feels like a 3-3, 4-2, 2-4 type game. Are you getting any extremes of the 5-1s in this one? The true onslaught.
I think you should, in almost any slate, be targeting some, especially if you're building 150 or even 20, I would say you should probably still be having some exposure to onslaughts because on any given slate, we can have one team just blow out the other one, even though Vegas has this as, I know I said 3.5 earlier, I believe, maybe it's moved a little bit, but it has as a close game. We can see a lot of deviation within one single game of one team blowing out the other. So I still want some exposure to that. I do think maybe the thing I would focus more on this slate, or I think is at least more pertinent to this slate, is just like I talked about how the passing game and running games are going to correlate versus each other. It's not impossible, but I do really find it difficult to imagine a game, or at least in the mathematical sense. Of course, anything can happen on one game, but in the greater ether of things, I do think the running backs specifically have great negative correlation with each other. Maybe less so the passing game, because I do think when one team scores, it could push another team to score, and you try and do that through the passing game. But I think playing, Darrell Henderson in captain Raheem Mostert and flex and getting another running back in there at that point, it seems like maybe it's unique, but it is so negatively correlated. I'd much rather, instead of running double running backs from the opposing teams, play, running back plus the defense, running back, captain, defense. I know Alex actually has been getting a little bit into playing some defense at captain. I don't know. I think against what we've seen from Jimmy Garoppolo, maybe this wouldn't be the worst slate to do that. You'd have to be shooting specifically for a tournament. Like, you only play that lineup in a tournament that is incredibly top heavy, like the largest tournaments on DraftKings. Outside of that, I don't think you'd want to go there. But, we've seen it fairly underowned, and it hit, man, the stretch of the Patriots defense specifically getting the optimal captain like 3 times in a row was pretty brutal. But then we've seen this season, because teams have scored so many points, that hasn't happened at all. And it hasn't really even come close to happening as far as I remember. So maybe this is a slate where you do that. But I think more so than focusing on the roster build, this slate is one where there's a lot of potential negative correlation. For me, that's the running backs. You could also have the same argument with players like Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, who are fighting for what could end up being a fairly small pie after you take away George Kittle's monstrous shares. The same things could be said for Kupp and Woods, where I don't think either of these teams plan on, if they have their way, passing a ton. So it's relatively small pies. So I think maybe that's a way that you can both get unique and build plus EV lineups, is understanding the correlations between these teams.
All righty. Let's get on over here. So let's see about some questions. I think we've got everything here. So let's get that. Oh, I see Greg's mentioning hit that like button. We do appreciate that. Also hit that subscribe button down in the bottom right. I think we just crushed it over 38,000 subscribers. Today we had 3,200 concurrent viewers. For the first time, we broke the 3,000 mark for NFL. We, of course, have hit 4,000 for NBA, but we were very happy. Thank you all for helping that happen. Reminder, we do run our shows starting at 10 in the morning on NFL Sundays and go through lock. And then, of course, we circle back with the NFL Live before lock. Tomorrow we'll have to see. It looks like that doubleheader is holding. So I suspect we're all good. Last week didn't quite make it, but we've got it here. So I would assume, we don't have the official schedule up, but I would feel free to assume that we are going to have a show 1 hour before lock covering that, and we will treat it as a 2-game slate. What the sites did last time was just go real heavy on that as opposed to the showdowns. So we will adjust our content accordingly, but we will still have showdown content because, of course, that second game still gonna have some big tournaments for that. But I want to remind you, you can get all of your showdown content for just $3.95 a week here through the NFL Express package. That gets you the player projections, the both ownership and player projections. It gets you the boom bust rating, chance of them being in top 5 on FanDuel, top 6 on DraftKings. And you also get the Alex big board. You get player grades for the full slate. The only thing you don't get is ownership for the full slate, but you get it for the showdown. Same thing with player projections, but you get it for showdowns. And let's face it, we're averaging 3.5 showdowns per week now. That's like just over $1 per showdown slate. Come on, step behind the paywall. You also get the Slack chat as a part of that as well. How are you? DK, how are you weighting the running backs for the Rams? Is it Hendo first, or how much are you going with Brown there? You've had a few minutes to after you mentioned you liked him quite a bit. You still feel that?
Yes, I think Henderson still projects to be the lead back, and it's not like it's not like he comes out of nowhere. Before last season, I guess, they drafted him, and people thought he could potentially be the replacement, the heir apparent to Todd Gurley. He was, I believe, a high 3rd round pick, if I have that number right. It's not like he comes out of nowhere. He has the draft pedigree. He was impressive in college, one of these electric Memphis running backs, like running back university in Memphis, apparently. So it's not like he doesn't have, a pedigree of being capable of producing fantasy points. It just didn't happen in the NFL in his first season. But it shouldn't be shocking that he comes out of nowhere. We shouldn't call it out of nowhere. So I think Henderson still should project to be the lead back. And interestingly, last week, it was a lot of garbage time. I believe last week was the week where they kind of just buried Washington. But, we saw both Malcolm Brown and Cam Akers. Cam Akers saw 67% of his touches, and Malcolm Brown saw 80% of his touches come in essentially garbage time when the game was within 10% or less of a winnable chance, essentially. So the game was mostly out of contention. That's when Brown and Akers got involved. When the game actually mattered, Henderson was even more of the lead back on this team. So you might get a little misled if you're just box score surfing. But Henderson last week was absolutely the guy. I think I'm going to have some Henderson in captain. I like him in the flex as well. And I don't think because Malcolm Brown's price is so incredibly low that you can't pair him with a Malcolm Brown. If Malcolm Brown was 4K or something, I would say it's very unlikely that both these guys pay off their salary. You need like multiple touchdowns split between them. You don't need multiple touchdowns from Malcolm Brown, or he could get one. Henderson could have an impressive pass catching day. So Henderson, I like in the captain. I'll probably beat over the field on him at captain because running backs give you that chance where they score and they don't help anyone else. It's quite a unique position to be in at captain. So I like Henderson. I think Malcolm Brown, more than anything, is just a salary saver and a very good one at that. I still don't think I'm going to have much of him, if any, at captain. And this slate, Sundays, because I like work all day on Sundays, I'm mostly focusing on single entry 3 max, a little higher stakes, but a little like more manageable amount of entries. So Brown probably won't end up being in my player pool at captain specifically, but I will be over the field on him in flex because I do think there's a decent amount of upside for him just because we know the Rams want to run so much, and he could just come out as the 1B or even the 1 running back.
Do you think it is worth going with Mostert and Kittle on if you're building one DK lineup? That's the challenge I am running into. I can kind of go with Mostert. I'm doing Kittle as captain, but I end up with both kickers, both quarterbacks, and Deebo Samuels. I lose out on Mostert, but I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think you can run both those guys specifically because of their market share numbers. Whether the team ends up skewing pass heavy or run heavy, I think that'll be very heavily affected by the game script they play. If they end up getting up to a lead, maybe Mostert ends up breaking another one. I think he has the 2 fastest carries in next gen stats history. One of them was, I think both of them might even be this year. So he has a ton of playmaking potential. He doesn't need a ton of carries to get it done, essentially because he has such a propensity of breaking long ones. And then even if they do end up just riding him into the ground, if they throw 20, 25 pass attempts, which would be an incredibly low number for an NFL game, even if they get to that low number, it's very possible that George Kittle ends up seeing 10 to 12 of those targets. So on the other side, I think there is actually a more reasonable case that guys like Kupp and Henderson, it's more difficult to get them in lineups because they don't have crazy market share numbers. But when you look at Kittle, his team doesn't have to pass a lot for him to get it done because he controls such a high amount of the passing volume in San Francisco. So I'd be much more likely to double up on, and they're more expensive too, but I think I would be much more likely to double up on the expensive 49ers and choose my spots with the Rams as opposed to going the other way, because the Rams seem like, because their market share numbers around the board aren't as high, they do need a pass heavy script to get like Kupp and Woods there, or more run heavy script to get a Henderson or potentially a Brown there, but Brown's just a good price.
All right, I'm running my little crunches here. I think I'm going 30% Kittle on captain. That feels a little high, but I'm good with it. Let's see. Where do you rate Goff as what is the best FanDuel MVP?
I still think it's Raheem Mostert. I understand that quarterback is one of the premier 2 positions we should be targeting. I do think the market share numbers, like we're going to see 60 to 70% of carries go to Raheem Mostert. And despite, running back efficiency being kind of like a moot point, 4 versus 4.5, 5 yards per carry, we have seen just week in, week out, that no matter who is playing, Kyle Shanahan can produce efficient running games. And I do think that that's what they would prefer to do, especially what we've seen from Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, they probably want to play high Jimmy Garoppolo because he hasn't played particularly well. And the game is projected to be close enough that I think Raheem Mostert's volume as a rusher makes him a good captain, or I guess a good MVP on FanDuel. And he's not a 0 in the passing game. We saw, I think it was 5 targets last week. It's not like you're locking yourself into 2 catches like you are with Derrick Henry. I think you could project them for like more of a market share of receptions than a guy like Derrick Henry or, early season Joe Mixon or whatever. So I don't hate his passing game. I think his running game is one of the best on the slate. It's obviously the best on the slate. And on a normal slate, I might consider playing a quarterback at MVP, and I still will have exposure to them in MVP, but they won't be my highest exposed guys. because both of these quarterbacks are such middling, mediocre plays. Jimmy Garoppolo, you run the risk of him getting benched, or more importantly, he just doesn't play well and they don't bench him. Who cares? And on the other side, Jared Goff, his team doesn't even want to throw the football. So because of the confluence of factors around the quarterbacks, I do think this is a slate where I don't feel quite the need to go quarterback at MVP. Normally on FanDuel, that's probably your primary position to target. I think Mostert's production as a runner and the lack of production from both quarterbacks flips the script on that, but I'm still not going as crazy to say like Cooper Kupp or anything.
All right, we've got 3.5 minutes left. I am going to upload my files because that would probably be a good idea right now. And I forgot to put out my head-to-heads. I'm sorry, guys. I did that last week and had some fun. I put out my 10 head-to-heads. We'll do that again in the upcoming week. Don't worry. You guys won't have any time to go chase them down right now. Let's see. Upload. Oof, gonna be cutting it close, Kyle. Gonna be cutting it close. Makes you feel alive a little bit, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, I on Sundays I'm too busy. I can't even like play big volumes on the Sunday show, and because I do this, so I have a very few amount of lineups that I run on Sundays, and then on Mondays and Thursdays I build like a full 150.
All right, let's get that taken care of there. Delete that. Download. Make sure I choose the right time slot because there's nothing worse than doing all of that incorrectly. Sort the lineups for a little mixture. Because, that way my wife and mine don't get caught up. Kidding. God, it was a bloodbath for me today. I lost about $500. That makes me sad. Because we don't have baseball for me to make it back.
That's okay. Baseball sucks.
Oh, don't say that. Baseball's my most lucrative sport.
Okay, well, if you're making money at baseball, it's
by
awesome.
Far. Where did I get the wrong page? And fingers crossed. All right, I'm in. So we'll get on our last couple of questions here. Kupp or Kittle? I would go Kittle in all formats on both sites.
Yeah, even adjusting for salary, I still think Kittle's a better play.
Mostert or Woods?
I'm on Mostert. I've talked about him as what I think to be the best MVP on FanDuel. I think he's in the conversation as the best DraftKings captain. I would still take him underneath George Kittle, but I think he's probably my locked-in number 2, even on DraftKings, where you can definitely talk more about getting receivers there. I still think he's my number 2 because the quarterback play is just basically the same arguments I made for him on FanDuel MVP. But because it's DraftKings PPR, I do put the edge on George Kittle. But he's my number 2 there, so take that.
All right. Let's see. Well, by the time they hear this, Akers or Brown, that'll be our last one. I'd go.
I go Malcolm Brown. I still am not sure what we see from. It seems like either one of Darrell Henderson or Cam Akers will get involved, and Malcolm Brown is just going to have this weekly role as like this steady hand running back. He's a guy who I believe last year they signed to like a second round tender or something. They've kept him for a handful of years. He's just like the most there because he's good enough at a bunch of things coaches like guys. I think his price is definitely worth playing Malcolm Brown specifically over Akers.
All right, please do, before you leave, hit that like button and also the subscribe button, little red button down there in the bottom right. That helps us out a lot, as we have learned. We'd love to get up to 40,000 subscribers here. It doesn't cost you anything, and as Lofty says, he'll happily refund you your misery. Here's my ownership. I did not play either defense, full stop. Interesting. I wonder if I had something set up incorrectly, but I did not play either. I went 30% Sloman, 20% Robbie Solid Gold. I had a rule where I could not play more than 2 of those groupings, so that's what probably suppressed those things. George Kittle in the flex, 51%. Higbee and Everett, just 2 apiece. Would have liked that to be a little bit higher. Cooper Kupp is 60. Robert Woods, 55. Debo Samuels, 39. Brandon Ayuk, 6. Josh Reynolds, 14. Kendrick Bourne, 24. That's well above the field there. Those first couple are also well above the field. That's where I'm losing out on some other things. And here's my big losing spot. Raheem Mostert, 27%. That is where I'm making a stand. Darrell Henderson, 2%. Malcolm Brown, 24%. It's a complete pricing thing. Jerick McKinnon, 12. Probably wouldn't have got him if Wilson was going to be active. Cam Akers, 8%. Quarterbacks, 63 Goff, 55 Garoppolo. I feel that these teams are going to be passing tonight. And then let's see, captains, Kittle 29, Goff 14, Garoppolo 10, Cup, Mostert 6 apiece, Woods 4, and then anybody else that got it is 2. And somehow I have JaMychal Hasty as a captain on one lineup. Oh. Interesting. I may need to rethink that process because he popped up because his captain rating is more than 3 points, and I said it. Don't take anybody less than 3 points. Yeah. Lesson learned. But there we go. All right. Why are we talking about Julio Jones here?
Julio, monster. Yeah, it sounds like if Josh Reynolds has a good night or Brandon Ayuk busts, like one of us is going to have a good night because I felt much more on the Raheem Mostert side and a little more defense, but our Venn diagram includes Josh Reynolds as a nice thick center. So if he hits, I think we have a good night. One of us.
Yeah, we shall see. But with that, gamers, we will start this all over again tomorrow, 10 a.m. We've got the NFL DFS strategy show. Of course, we'll do a little bit for the World Series once that circles back around, but it's going to be football for quite some time. But keep in mind, we do have college football, the betting show / DFS show. So it's not just football betting. They're talking player props. They're talking specific DraftKings, and I'm assuming FanDuel pricing, the part I was listening to. They said we're talking DraftKings, but I believe FanDuel does have those contests. But it's a lot about players, constructions, and players in the pool. So that is important for those of us that are in states where we can't quite bet yet. But with that, gamers, follow us at Awesemo_COM on Twitter. You can follow Kyle at Kyle Tweets here, and you can find me at EMac DFS. With that, gamers, good luck.